Hello and welcome to the Kuyumungi Institute, our Q&A conversation for exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, we have a meeting this week, our advisors, our volunteers, our supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Kuyumungi Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of the deeper human connection to all of life. It's part of our mission to expand our own experiential research with that of the multidisciplinary understanding that's available to us today. So as an educational institution, we take a very open approach and invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. These Sunday discussions have included a full spectrum of topics from the arts to the sciences and everything in between. And you're welcome to visit our website at kuyumungiinstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, we invite you to join our community circle, to become a supporting member. And we thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Kuyumungi Institute. Actually, over the last year, we've been adding an additional focus to the concept of global consciousness. We've been looking at the roles of individuals in the overall global family. We look at for ways in which we can contribute to healing, to peace, and also contribute to the many challenges we face as a civilization. At the core of how we approach such a mission is first dealing with ourselves, taking responsibility for our own conscious views, the worldviews that we hold, the way that we conduct ourselves. And that brings us to today's topic, love. Love is all about connection, and it provides us with peace and inner knowingness. It leads us to that self-love and acceptance, first of all. And as we connect with a total unconditional acceptance of ourselves, then we can align ourselves with that natural energy that's everywhere around us. And maybe by shifting that on each and every individual to become aware and in the most practical manner, fully embracing the brilliance and power of love, then we can have the greatest effect, heart, mind, and soul, all the way down to the core of who we are.
Indeed, when we are in that field of consciousness, we operate from love. And that's where we find so much connection with the work of our guest today, Nedra Fetterman. We first met her on a panel discussion on communication with Ashok Gangadine some months back, where she's a senior fellow of the Global Dialogue Institute and where she counsels on communicating as both sender and receiver for the deep dialogue to reach true intimacy. Boy, that caught our attention. And we felt so aligned with what Nedra had to say that we asked her back on mentoring love. And she says, love is an art to master and a way of being in the world, one that can be cultivated, nurtured, and sustained for relationships that are real, sturdy, compassionate, kind, and wholehearted. She writes, most of the time, we live in forgetfulness. We forget the original vision that brought us together in the first place. We become distracted from the deeper purpose of our lives, and we're no longer genuinely present to one another or to our love. Nedra views the inevitable crises of relationships as wake-up calls to deepen one's understanding of life, tap into life-changing wisdom, and with it, bring empowering knowledge and tools to live from for a deeper and an expanded sense of self, and to create the healthy relationships that we thrive on. The human journey, she says, can be rewarding and enjoyable when one has the right navigational tools. We so agree with that. Nedra Fetterman is a love mentor, a licensed psychologist, a faculty member of the International Imago Training Institute, a clinical associate in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. She's had a private practice since 1982, and she gives workshops. Titles include Getting the Love You Want, Living from Your Deepest Core, and Blueprints for Wholeness and Growth. She joins us from just outside Philadelphia, where she lives with her husband, Joe, of 41 years. Welcome back, Nedra Fetterman. So good to have you here.
Yeah.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege.
And to have you here. So being a love mentor is an interesting job, and I'm sure there's quite the story of how you came to focus on this set of skills in your life. It's one that occupies us all. Think of all the songs in the world. Most of them, I think, are by statistical are love songs, right? We don't come with an owner's manual for love, but we are to live in this field of love. We are to open up to love. I think nature herself has hardwired us for love as social beings. Love, mothers nurturing. They're biochemicals that infuse us, that give us seeking that love, to operate on love. So it's an important skill set to learn in life. We need tune-ups.
Maybe the most important. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, from a man. This is beautiful. No wonder I married him.
Yeah.
So tell us how you came to make this your life's work.
Yeah, well, I love what you just said. We are wired for love from birth. We are born with the skill to connect and attach and smile and love. And I have a 20-month-old grandson right now. And since the day he was born, like he was like arms open, reaching for love. And so, it begs the question, what happens? Why is it so hard? If love is our deepest essence and love is our nature, and we're born for love and we're wired for love, and it's how we survive. Those little babies wouldn't survive if they didn't know how to connect. Why is it so hard? And how I arrived at this particular skill set has to do with my own growing up as a child in a very dysfunctional marriage. My parents, my mom was like 18 years old and she fell in love with my dad, who was 26. And they are both brilliant, creative, loving, remarkable human beings, but had no skills to navigate their relationship or their children. And it was tough. And it was tough because as a little girl, I just was a little bundle of love. And it was such a disconnect to be so filled with love in a family that had so much pain. So the joke in my family is that I was a marriage counselor since age 4.
How did you do that? How did you demand or put that on the table at age 4? Is that just a natural gift of children?
I think so, because my own son, I remember having some kind of tension with my husband, and my son, he was a little older than 4, he might have been 6. He looked at us and he said, I want you to go back and remember the day that you got married and look at each other again, the way you were looking at each other on that day.
Oh, from the mouths of babes, as they say.
You should have got a billing for that one. That's the professional advice that you don't get for free too often.
Right. So children, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, children are brilliant and instinctively loving and wanting to heal their parents. And so I don't remember what I did at age 4 that my parents were saying. She was a marriage counselor since age 4, but I remember what my son was like and what he would do.
Well, you found your calling early on, didn't you?
Yeah. So anyway, the way I got into this particular line of work had to do with these same parents. I was 32 years old and I was expecting my first child, this young man I was just telling you about at age 6. So it was 6 or 7 years prior to that moment. And my husband and I went to visit my parents, and I had a conversation with them, and I said that I really wanted them to clean up their act, that it was not okay for this first grandchild and my first child to experience what I experienced as a child. And you have to understand that my dad was a psychiatrist and my mother a therapist.
Oh, interesting. This is some tough love you're administering. Yeah.
And so my dad looked at me and he said, I forgive you. The hormones of pregnancy are making you crazy. That was his response.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And I don't remember what my mother said, but she remembers that I said to her, you're in danger of losing a daughter. So I don't know what she said that prompted me to say that, but she remembers that. What I remember is I left crying and thinking that I was never going to really talk with them again. And as a result of that moment, they went to New York City. We lived outside of Philadelphia, and they attended a workshop with 200 other couples. And it was called Getting the Love You Want Workshop. And they never told me they were going. They did this on their own. But when they got back, they were different. And I don't even, this was like 35 years ago. So it's vague in my mind what happened. But I do remember saying to my mother, you're different. I've never felt like you ever listened to me before. What happened? And she said, well, we went to a workshop. I learned a lot. And someday I hope you go to this workshop.
Now you're
And I noticed they were warmer to each other. Their constant criticism and bickering stopped. They were listening. They were validating. I didn't have that word back then, but since then I've learned validation is saying to another human being, you make sense to me, and here's why you make sense. And they were empathizing, and what empathy sounds like is, I imagine what your feeling is, and it was transformative for everyone that they made that change. And when my son was, I think, like 4 years old, I finally went to that workshop. And I was already a PhD psychologist, but I learned things in one weekend that I had never been taught in all my education.
Yeah.
wow.
And I said to them, this is my life's work right here. I mean,
Yeah. But why isn't, if love is so foundational to our well-being and to communication and to making the world go round in the way that nature designed us and it, then why isn't those skill sets taught to therapists and psychiatrists and just the mental health field in general? Why aren't these more widely distributed? Why do we have to seek out a specialist workshop for this? Do you
yeah. Well, my experience is that when a child is raised in an environment like that, where there is listening, there is validation, there is empathy, along with limits and boundaries, but I kind of call it the Texas two-step. On the one hand, empathy, like really seeing that there's another world that may have a different experience. But that's an important point we need to get back to. But if you're raised in an environment like that, you actually don't need to go to school to learn it. You learn it. Your parents are your first teachers. So how the more conscious and healed the parent is, and then the child lives in that environment, we wouldn't need to send them to school. They would just...
Well, let me expand from there. What if we lived in a society in which that was just the MO, the modus operandi? What if all of society did this?
Right. What if we had what we call a relational civilization? like truly
Mhm.
relational culture. I think the insight from this work, I mean, I'd love to talk about this work. It's pretty simple, but profound. One of the key statements is we are born in relationship
Mhm.
and we're wounded in relationship. And therefore we need to be healed in relationship.
I see. Yeah.
And where I've gone with that is there's actually three kinds of relationship. One is relationship with the self. Then there's the relationship with the other.
Mhm.
And then there's the relationship with the field, with source energy, with, the divine energies of the world. And we need those 3 points of connection. So what's hardest for most of us is relationship with the other.
But we have to start with relationship with ourselves. And I want to say one reason we resonate with you so deeply is that we are here to celebrate Indigenous wisdom. And first and foremost, it's about right relation
Worldwide.
with oneself, with
Mhm.
one's community and environment, and then with the universe at large. The
Exactly.
same.
The simplicity of that
Yeah.
message gets so lost, and it's so
Yeah.
simple to understand that it begins with ourselves. And somehow it's always the outward focus, the outward looking outside. Why is
Or
Biden
blaming.
doing this? Or what's
Yeah.
Putin doing? What am I doing? How am I
Yeah.
conducting my life? How am I treating my children, my family, my relatives, my community?
Myself.
And myself first, of course.
Yeah.
So, Paul, let me say this. The relationship with the self
Mhm.
is frequently contaminated by the relationship with the earliest relationship with the parents, because the way that we're treated, we then treat ourselves the way we were treated. So for example,
Mhm.
I identify with feeling neglected and abandoned by parents who were very preoccupied and absorbed with their own pain. And as a 35-year-old, it finally dawned on me that I was always feeling abandoned by people out there, but I was really abandoning myself. Like I really wasn't showing up for myself. I kept looking outside.
Right.
And we need both, but I don't think we're aware that the relationship with the self is so complicated because we've internalized what happened in the field with the parents, with ourselves. And so the insight of this work, which is called imago relationship therapy, was that when we're with a committed partner, we unconsciously recreate what was familiar.
Mhm.
Because
So
we
what
think that's the way it is, right? We don't know any
Yeah,
different.
that's the way it is. So whatever we grew up with, that's what got wired in as this is love. So on the one hand, we know, like all of us consciously say to ourselves, I want something different than I grew up with.
Right.
No, I don't want to marry mom. I don't want to marry dad. I want something. So on a conscious level, that's what we're thinking. But there's this unconscious level where we have to, and this is really hard to get, we have to recreate the conditions of childhood in order to heal it.
Yes.
It doesn't just heal on its own. So if I had a very critical mother or a very preoccupied father, I will either partner with someone like that who's preoccupied and critical, or both, or one or the other, or I will behave in a way to get that person to be that way.
Oh,
Or I will
interesting.
be that way myself.
Right.
Somehow the energy of preoccupation and criticism will
It
show
is
up in the
mentioned.
field. And it shows up in the field. And this is what's so confusing, is that people will say to me, he's so critical, she's so critical, not realizing that there's this unconscious dance that's happening that's recreating the original condition.
Mhm.
So that you can see it and heal it and deal with it.
Yeah. And
It's part
Freud
of our curriculum.
observed this. Like Freud was not known as a couples therapist. He was definitely an individual guy. But he observed the repetition compulsion, that people kept repeating things until they got it right. And so we think that's what's happening in intimate relationships. There's some unconscious dance where it's being repeated and there's an opportunity for healing and to get it right. If there were instruction manuals, like Laura Lee, I loved how you said that. We don't come with instruction manuals, so couples don't understand what's happening.
Hmm.
Why is it so painful? How did something that started with so much hope and promise, it felt so good in the beginning. I felt so loved, so accepted, and now it feels like the shadow of the valley of death. Like, how did that happen?
Mhm.
And this particular way of working was the first way that made sense to me. It happens, and I've just seen it over and over and over again, that the conditions of childhood show up because it wants to be healed.
So it repeats itself. It's the old joke that a guy will say, I've been married 5 times, but all the women became the same person. It's sort of like they kept recreating the same dynamics over and over and over again and keep blaming it on the woman or the partner or whatever the situation is. And it was
Right.
actually that same internal thing that had to be recreated because the lessons haven't been learned.
Well, also, we need to look at our childhood. We need to really assess what the conditions were in a loving way. And I know my sister and I sat down and we go, oh, here's the dysfunction of the family. What are we going to do different? We actually had conversations around that. How
Mhm.
can we notice it, forgive it,
break the
but
chain.
break the cycle? I think it's so interesting that so much growth has happened in the last couple of decades with the whole self-help movement. We've really been able to come to grips with that and look at this. Do you find that it's different now than it was?
But there's dysfunction even in the self-help community.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
so there's a growth happening, but at least
Are
at
you
least
ever
it's
going to
get-
get out of it
it-
entirely? It's a lifetime
it's addressed. It's being
exercise.
addressed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
Well,
what
I
are the
think
steps?
I think we've moved from over the past couple decades from a more psychological kind of navel gazing type of approach to really a more spiritual, a psycho-spiritual approach.
Mm.
So I really understand, and this imago relationship therapy really says this also, that human beings have a dual nature. So we are, I mean, I guess so many people say this, like we are, spiritual beings having a human experience.
Right.
Yeah.
But, the way that I say it is, at our core, there is this divinity. So we all carry a divine spark at our core. And that is also supported by quantum physics now that says, we live in a field of consciousness and energy, and we're part of that field. So we are conscious beings and we are, energetic beings, but it's housed in this very human body. So we're both human beings that can be wounded and bruised and injured. And, but that core of us remains undamaged.
Yeah.
Nothing that it can get blocked, it can get obscured. It's kind of like on a cloudy day, you can't see the sun. So if the core of us is like the sun,
It's always there.
it's always there.
And there's, it's such a benevolent universe. I find there's so many ways to tap into that eternal core within us, that divine core within us.
Mhm.
So I think we're hardwired for that as well. The
Mhm.
basis of our work. Here's one way.
Mm.
And that gives us so many gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
integrating this wisdom into our lives, because that challenge is that even those of us that see ourselves on a path of exploration and spirituality and all of this, and yet we still find ourselves repeating parental wisdom, or what do you want to call it? Wisdom.
It's a life journey, isn't it?
Yeah, you
And
continue.
also, how do you heal the mother and child relationship? How do you heal all the family dynamics?
Yeah.
How do you heal? Yeah, it's not just the intimate relationships. I guess therapy has to be done in group,
right. But the
a
power,
larger context.
Go
the
ahead.
power of the intimate relationship is that there's commitment.
Mm.
And it takes a safe container and a commitment to the process for the healing to really happen. And we don't think that these kinds of dynamics, they happen most intensely with the intimate partner, because
Mhm. It's
how
an
many
ongoing
people
relationship. Yeah.
and how many people are you naked with, and are you vulnerable with, and do you want a secure attachment with? So it's different than a friendship. I mean, so many people come to see me and they say, I don't have this difficulty with my friends.
The pressure's not on there, is it?
It's
That
just this
degree. You can
person.
divorce your friends easily. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
well. So did this change the way that your parents did their psychotherapy and their therapy? Did they become better at their jobs with this information? I would imagine so.
They did. Yeah. Yeah. And for a while we worked together. We would
Ah,
do weekend workshops for couples together, my husband, myself, my mother, my father. And eventually they aged out, and which is very sad. You know, they
yeah.
wish I could have held them in, time, but
Mm.
um
What about
like
the biochemistry? What, they say, even a mother holding a child, oxytocin, the body just releases oxytocin. I've heard it said that if a woman can't get pregnant, if she starts holding babies, her
mm,
body then gears up for
wow.
that. We had this is a funny story. We had a trip to Oaxaca and the Mayan pyramids. And one of them was a therapist for getting pregnant. And she said that she was just aghast and delighted with all these giant phalluses that were there in the museums, these artifacts that the Mayan community left of old. And so she bought a reproduction and she set it on her desk. And when the woman come in having infertility problems, she just said, I just want you to hold this in your hands. And she felt that, that there was some magic infused in that, in a woman just opening up to that. And she reported great results from that. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So even the cues that we find in our environment, I guess my point is, generate different biochemicals within us.
Yeah. Well, you're raising really a great point. That the convincer for me
Yeah.
about this approach was one sentence. And that sentence was, anybody can do relationship short term, but to go the distance for a long-term committed partnership, you
mhm.
need two qualities. One is safety, and one is feeling fully alive. And if you feel safe and if you feel fully alive, those relationships tend to go the distance. So for a woman who wants to have a baby, and if she can't conceive, for that woman to begin to have the biochemicals of safety is really important.
Mhm.
And so the chemicals of cortisol and adrenaline, those are the chemicals of like stress and excitement. Oxytocin would be more safety, stability, security. That's what people need. In
Mm.
a long-term relationship, however, oxytocin is not enough because you tend to fall asleep. You get too comfortable. So the long-term relationship is, well, how do we have the goodness of oxytocin so we feel safe and
A
secure?
little fire in there as
And
well.
put a little fire in
Yeah.
there, have excitement and mystery and flirtation and,
Yeah.
be really present. One of the insights I've had is that if we feel both safe and alive, we're usually in the present moment. And
Okay.
in the present moment, if you're really present, you have no idea what's about to unfold because you've never been in that moment before.
Exciting.
Yeah.
And it demands your attention. It demands
Yeah.
your being fully present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So part of mentoring love is teaching people the skill sets of safety. How do I become a source of safety for other people instead of waiting for them to make me safe?
I see.
What are some of those skills?
Well, we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but we also need to teach the skill set of being alive, of
Mm.
laughing, having fun,
Mhm.
growing, taking risks, having life as an adventure, being in the present moment. So there's a lot of skills to really having a satisfying, soulful relationship with another human being. But I do begin with safety. I think
safe containers are so important for growth to happen, isn't it? To be vulnerable, to open up.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the brain. It turns out, as the brain science over the past 20 or 30 years has really been articulated and written about, it turns out the amygdala, well, we usually show the hand model of the brain. So imagine this is the brain. This is the brain stem back here, which is responsible for survival. And we call it the reptilian brain because we share it with all reptiles. This thumb represents the limbic system where the feelings are. It's also where memory is. So it's interesting that memory and feelings are side by side.
That is. Yeah.
Yeah. So like when memories get triggered, feelings often get opened up. It's really interesting. They're side by side. And then the prefrontal cortex wraps around the limbic system. And right here, it's the amygdala. And the amygdala is like the watch guard of the brain, like the security guard. And the amygdala is asking one question only. Am I safe or am I in danger?
Oh,
Am I
interesting.
safe? It is always assessing consciously and unconsciously. Am I safe or am I in danger? And if the answer comes back danger,
Fight or flight. Yeah.
fight or flight. So it's fight, flight, freeze, or fold. There's 4 F's.
Oh, I didn't know those. Okay. That makes sense. I've seen that. Yep.
And it's hardwired into the brain. Fight, flight, freeze, or fold. And by fold, what I mean is like submit, placate, accommodate. I'll give up myself in order to stay safe. So when you see fight, flight, freeze, or fold in yourself or in your partner, one of the skills is to begin to say, there's no safety here. How do I create safety?
Okay.
Because the brain is only doing fight, flight, freeze, or fold because it's assessing danger, risk. I've got to protect myself. And that's when relationships get really difficult. And you can see this globally as well as interpersonally. When the world doesn't feel safe and countries don't feel safe, they build their defenses. And that's what we do interpersonally too. And when you have defense system in relationship with defense system, nothing good really happens. You can't have intimacy between 2 defenses.
Right.
People,
Walls up. Yeah.
right. So intimacy depends on vulnerability. Intimacy depends on safety, that I can take my walls down, open up, be vulnerable, and connect.
First step. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So let's just get back to the brain for a second. This is the brain. We have a relationship. So we have 2 brains in relationship. This is an integrated brain, even though it looks like 2 fists, but it's an integrated brain. But when there's a trigger, and unfortunately, intimacy triggers childhood. When there's a trigger, the neuroscientists tell us we flip our lid and our prefrontal cortex ruptures. We're no longer an integrated, connected brain. And the limbic system and reptilian brain, we're now emotionally hijacked.
Gotcha.
And relationship is impossible almost if you have 2 people triggered at the same time and both emotionally hijacked. And there's this rupture between the prefrontal cortex and the rest of the brain. So I remember being at a conference with these neuroscientists, and I remember saying, so what do you do? And the neuroscientist said, you need to learn to give yourself a hug. Means we all need to
Engage
learn to self-soothe. So we can get back into an integrated, coherent brain state. So that's another skill set, which is how do we, the closer we get to the loved one and the longings we have to have our needs met, to be loved, to feel safe, the more easily triggered we are. So we need these skills of how do I stay coherent and calm and curious and open and connecting in the face of someone who I'm carrying all these worries that they may disappoint me, they may frustrate me, they may reject me, they may neglect me. I mean, there's just so much at stake. We're carrying so much with us into this relationship.
So many moving parts, and nature has also wired us for survival. So that fight or flight or fold or freeze gets triggered, and we're on defense mode. We're about saving our life.
Right. So that's why we have to get beyond survival. So if we're in survival, it's very hard to relate to the other.
So,
And coming back to the concept of being present, being in the present moment, maybe that's one of the titillations of love itself, is that for a time period, we can experience present moment where all of a sudden the rest of the world doesn't matter, that we're in this state, we lose cocoon. Like when we first started dating, we didn't need the rest of the world. We just had each other.
people
And we just
describe us as
close
they're
the
off in their own
door,
cocoon.
no TV, no radio, no
Yeah.
nothing, just
We're
us.
so fascinated with each
Invite
other.
us to dinner parties. No, thank you. We just want to be together. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And going back in the 1970s or 80s or whatever it was, the book was written, Be Here Now. And then later on the book, Power of Now. And that there's all this interest and we all recognize that
And
element.
presencing is now, even in
Presencing,
business now,
right.
presencing is the key
But
word.
it can't be an intellectual thing that you read a book and now you're living that life. It has to be something that shifts, that has
direct experience.
Direct experience. And that's what we're talking about here. And that relationship to love.
Yeah, absolutely. And the rubber meets the road in your intimate relationship. Like it's no longer just a theory or a book. You have to live it.
Right.
Well, you're raising another important point, which is that relationships go through stages, developmental stages, just like children do. So you just beautifully described the first stage, which is the falling in love stage. And, in that stage, it's like 1 + 1 = 1. You and I are one, we're the one, and the rest of the world disappears. And that's a wonderful stage. And unfortunately, like all developmental stages, we eventually outgrow that stage because we can't stay 1 + 1 = 1. So the next stage is 1 + 1 = 2. And in that stage, we realize, oh, we're not perfect soulmates. We are not fused together. There's actually two of us here.
Yeah.
And that's
Different needs. Yeah.
Different needs, right? We don't always think the same way. We don't always feel the same way. We have different needs at different times. And that can be a wonderful stage, realizing there's another person there. We're not the same person. It can also be a really scary stage because one person, we're suddenly confronted with the differing other. How do we relate to difference? And do we have the skills to negotiate the difference, or do we try to change the person to be the way we need them to be for me to be happy?
We found teamwork. We found that his skills are different than my skills, and my skills are different, but together we're stronger.
That's what I was just going to say.
We found that.
Don't try to
some
do
negotiation.
We don't want to be the same thing. I can't possibly do what she does, including what we're doing today. And so we have different skill sets, and so we can say, okay, good, that's your territory. Please go do that.
Yeah, we're very good on this is my turf, that's your turf, this is shared turf.
We don't compete for the same thing.
No, we don't.
Well, very little.
Yeah.
So
And that's a wonderful realization. It's like if you have a team, a baseball team, you don't all want to play the same position.
Good point.
Right. You all have different skill sets to make the team. So that's almost like 1 + 1 = 3, where there's you, there's me, and we're this team that's greater than
the team.
The individual parts.
Yeah.
The whole
So
then I was thinking there's got to be one more equation, which is 1 + 1 = infinity, which would be
Yeah.
the next
Mhm.
stage where you realize there's you, there's me, and we're connected to the infinite field. And there's this
Yeah.
interconnectedness that the world is larger than just you, me, and
Mhm.
our relationship. So how we understand the different stages is we call the first stage romantic love. We call the second stage the power struggle. And in that power struggle, when we realize you're not me, but I'm going to try to change you to be more like me, that's often when people go to see a therapist. That's a very painful stage to be in. And in that stage, people either separate, divorce, or just resign themselves to this is as good as it gets.
Right.
So my job is to really help people out of that stage into the next stage of realizing how do we have the skills to really build a team.
Mm.
And then we call that stage the awakening of differentiated consciousness.
Okay.
We're really moving from unconsciousness to consciousness,
Yeah.
from reactivity to receptivity. And
Isn't
then
that also similar to a child's development? So a child just goes, hey, I'm my own individual. There's a stage in that toddlership where they start to do that, don't they?
yeah, there's a stage of egocentricity too, like on the center of the world. Um, and so the child
I know
has
a
to
few people
learn
start.
there
Yeah.
are other people out there, and how do I accept? I mean, you and Paul have just beautifully articulated there's two of us, and I really appreciate the differences. Like I really benefit that this person is different than me. And that's not all people are there. Be surprised.
I like your equation though also on to infinity, that it's exciting to go, hey, we're part of a whole universe of life, that evolution has spent so many billions of years developing the scene for us to inhabit and to be connected with the all. I mean, that's a joyous place to be.
Yeah,
And I appreciate that that's just built in.
yeah, yeah.
Awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when you realize what Bobby was saying is I breathe in the oxygen from the plants, and the plants are breathing in my carbon dioxide. And there's this amazing interrelationship everywhere. I mean, it's so
All
we
these
call
moving
that
parts create the
right,
whole, and without that whole, we don't thrive, we don't survive.
right. So we see this as a journey from romantic love to mature love. And mature love is this 1 + 1 = infinity. And so we're looking at maturation of the species,
Oh, I
which
love that. Yeah.
I really feel like I'm dedicated to that goal.
Yep.
When you look at the technology we've invented with these amazing brains that we have, but we need to mature to be able to handle the amazing technologies that we've created. I think there's a big gap.
That's right. That's the big
Yeah.
discussion. Yeah. Yeah.
So
We
this
need,
mentoring is just needed to fill the breadth and depth of the whole story that we need a new story about ourselves and our place in the universe, who we are, where
who
we've
we
been,
are.
and where we're going. And that's our mission too. So
Yeah.
where do we feel so much resonance with
Yeah.
you in
Yeah.
this? Yeah.
Yeah.
It also brings up another point. And, we many years ago, 1990s, we interviewed Richard Brody, who wrote a book called The Virus of the Mind. And he talked about the memes and how we're repeating these things, these belief systems, either from our parents or from society. And you're watching the evening news and, oh my God, everything's so horrible. And I believe everything is so horrible and it will become even worse. And we keep buying into these things over and over and over again. It's creating who we are in such a dramatic way. The most dramatic way probably that we'll keep repeating
And I
these
would have to
things.
say, what is it about those memes that are feeding the brain and what it needs to do or wants to do?
But
Right. And can we change those?
But finishing my point though, and that
Yeah.
is how do we make that shift and recognize it as a meme and not who I am? that I'm just repeating these things that either my parents told me or society has told me
Yeah.
or the evening news or whatever. And that how can I come back? Because that shift is what's critical in this conversation for me. And that is
Okay.
that I want to understand these issues intellectually, but I also have to make the change individually, internally. I have to own it. I have to change. Like you said, your parents made a shift and a change from going to a workshop. That's what I think.
And we need to seek and engage those knowledge bases, right? And that's why I
So
think
let's
one
go
of our
back.
most.
Go ahead.
Let's go back to the brain for a second.
Sure.
So right now, the world, I would say, is in the reactive reptilian brain as a whole. You turn on the evening news, you just see reactivity after reactivity, fight and flight and freeze and fold. I mean, you just see it. And then our brains see it. And then we think that's the way the world is. And so we're just in this vicious cycle where mass consciousness is not particularly at a very elevated level. But there is a part of the brain right here. So in ancient wisdom traditions, they called it the third eye, the witness consciousness. In neuroscientist language, it's called the middle prefrontal cortex.
Ooh.
That part of the brain is not reactive, is no story. It's just receptive, just aware. It's quiet. It's curious. So the acronym that Dan Siegel, who's been a key player in the neuroscience field, he calls this middle prefrontal cortex, he's got an acronym for it. He calls it COAL, C-O-A-L, curious, open, accepting, and loving.
Yes.
And I just add a P for present, because when we're in the present moment, we're in our middle prefrontal cortex. We're in this witness consciousness.
Yeah.
And we need that. We need to evolve our brains as a species from reactivity to this part of the brain. Mindfulness, meditation, prayer, dialogue, we're harnessing this part of the brain. And for me, there's nothing more important than learning how to be a receptive human being, which means quieting the mind, setting the ego and reactivity aside, keeping ourselves calm, and being really curious about the other. And that's where Ashok's and my work really dovetail, and why we worked together for years, because we both were teaching how do you quiet, open, and recognize there's a world besides your own world, your own egocentric world. How do you do that? And Ashok would beautifully talk about it philosophically and theoretically. And then I had the nuts and bolts on how I'm teaching couples how to do this. So the hardest thing for couples typically is to recognize that there's two worlds and they're different. So the joke, this is a therapist joke, is two people decide to partner and make it official, and they go to a minister, a priest, or a rabbi, or somebody who can bless their union. And the person doing the blessing says, okay, two have now become one. And each one thinks to themselves, yes, and I'm the one. And that kind of thinking, my needs, my feelings, what have you done for me lately? I'm not happy, so it must be you. I'm going to try to change you so I can be happy.
Only you understood.
Well, okay, the way I see it is in a media background. I come from a media background. And so I was there in my first year in radio, there with daytime drive time hosts who was like, pound on the table. This is the way I want you to believe. This is the truth, people. And my approach was, oh, let's go exploring. This is the sacred task to fill in our worldview. This is my responsibility, no one else's, but let's go exploring hand in hand. And it's a big, beautiful universe out there. Let's go and look at it piece by piece by piece and make up our own mind. And I have
Yeah.
a gaping, I have an open, not a gaping mind. So nobody gets to fill it in but me. But
Wow,
this
so
is the
you're
journey.
living from here. Yeah, this would
That's
be
what
the
she
This is the
functions.
glorious
exciting
That's how she
journey.
open mind. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
fantastic.
Yeah. So that's the way I see it. And that's an approach to life. And that each of us are in charge of that. But together, it's more fun together. And that the aha experience is one of the most enjoyable experiences to have on that line of inquiry. You know, when you just have this flash and the universe
And-
opens for a moment, you get a good glimpse of it.
Rather than
So-
firing your gun of opinions, you're actually asking for opinions. You're asking for it to
I also
understand.
found as
And also in the world that we live in with
Yeah.
the polarization
easier to ask
politically,
questions
we
than
don't
to
hang out
dictate.
with each other anymore. There's a separation between views and we don't want to hear people with different views. So we lose something so
I
dramatically.
seek that out. Show
Yeah.
me something different. But
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting because Laura Lee mentioned this in the beginning, that I teach the skills of sending and the skills of receiving. So if you think about communication, you need a sender and a receiver for communication to happen. And normally we have one person or group sending and another sender or group or individual sending right back. And we
chaos
have
ensues. Yeah.
Yeah. So what does it mean to really receive another human being, especially if you don't agree? How do you stay calm? How do you stay curious and exploring, as Laura Lee is saying, and helping this person feel safe, even though you're very different? Because in that safety, we frequently say in that safety, differences don't get solved, but they get dissolved, because often, you know, if you have two polarized people, if you really listen long enough, often there is some shared value. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're both humans,
right?
right?
Yeah, we're both humans. We both want to live. We both want good things for our children and our families, and we may just have different ways of going about doing that.
It's sad that we live in a world where the commercial interests for media, social media, has to do with ramping us up and creating that fight. It's good for their bottom line. So that seems to be out there more so than it needs to be, right? We're being manipulated into that because then more clicks, more views, more advertising dollars, more our attention, presence. Our attention is a commodity, right? What our eyes see, what we engage with, has been turned into a commodity in today's world.
More so
And
than
so that's
ever.
why it's very, very precious to direct it. And what you're saying, we've got their hands on their own wheel, right? We can monitor so much in our brain, in our body, in our attention, where we want to go. We're in the driver's seat. And I think we forget that. We're swept up in these waves where
Well, I'm very concerned about the larger culture we live in and how it affects all of us.
Yeah.
Because the more we're treated as a commodity and we treat others as a commodity, it affects our relationship. You know, Martin Buber said it so beautifully and simply. He said, we need to shift from the I-it, where we objectify the other, I-thou, that the other is a sacred other, as sacred as you are. And learning that skill, I mean, I think it's radical what we're talking about, because how do we hold on to the I-thou in a culture where we are commoditized and objectified? And I think that's
we
why
go from the me to the we and realize we're all one family. This is one world, right? And we're part of the whole. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I also
Thank
want
you for the profundity of the work that you do.
Yeah.
It goes far beyond mentoring love. I mean, you're looking at how do we love one another in the universe as well? How do we make the world better? How do we bring in these skill sets to create the world we all want to live in? Because at the bottom line, we're all wanting the same thing.
But imagine if we raised our babies differently. I mean, so that we raised children who just had no tolerance for being objectified. Like what,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because the objectification happens, I mean, it happens really early, really, really early. I mean, the baby is born right away, they objectify the baby. Like, how long is it? How much does he weigh? Is it a boy? Is it a girl? They start putting people in boxes right away. And so I've been watching my grandson, and it's different being a grandparent than a parent because you're kind of a little removed and can observe it more. But the expectations for that baby to turn over at a certain time, to crawl at a certain time, to walk at a certain time.
Yeah.
And then that baby already, I saw it with my grandson, there is pressure, you know,
Mhm.
I'm not walking at 12 months. And yet the pressure from all the adults, unfortunately for me, he goes to daycare, but the pressure there for him to walk, the pressure from the
Yeah.
parent.
Yeah.
And
You better get into this preschool. You better go to these lessons so that you can get into this college, so that you can have this career. Yeah, they got their
so it happens very subtly, and it just keeps. And
building.
how do we really stay conscious that each individual is their unique flower, like the flower moon, like they're each going to grow in their own way and blossom in their own way and have their own purpose and intention for being here on the planet. Like,
Yeah.
how do we really see one another and not put these expectations and pressures to be a certain way and conform to the norms?
And it
Because
begins at home. I know that my eldest sister, when her son came to her and said, "Mom, I don't think I'm ever going to marry and have kids," and I just, she goes, "Jack, whatever you want to be in life, I'm happy for you. That's all I care about.
I'm not going to be traditional, whatever that
You
is.
don't need
Yeah.
to be any. You don't
Yeah.
need to live to your own
Right.
inner."
this was your mother.
My eldest sister.
Yeah.
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 My mother came around to that too in the end.
Yeah.
I kind of demanded that from her.
That's another hour. But anyway,
Yeah.
I want
So-
to open it up to some
Yes.
questions and comments as
sure
we
we
go
have
along. So
plenty.
go ahead and raise your hand using the Zoom screen so we can see you. And I know there was a couple of questions already posted in the chat room, but why don't you go ahead and just do it verbally instead of the chat room, if you would, please, and we'll continue the conversation. So this has really been, Nedra, for me, this is very healing. I feel like this is billable hours for you to be. Send me a bill because, but I like recognizing where we're at and where we can do more. I like recognizing the areas of accomplishment, but also where the next level is, you know, and also things are shifting and changing from the world of, and I'm just putting a rewind button back to John Gray and men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and that whole concept of what he brought up, it was impactful at the time. It shifted. It made people feel okay with the fact that they were different. Maybe nowadays with gender fluidity, it's not so cool anymore. But the idea was at the time is that we can be different and acknowledge one another, and that we can share the world together and not compete and not try to change you. And maybe that was a fresh idea at the time when it first came out.
I think there needed to be attention to how do we build that bridge of connection between the differing worlds. Like, if you're from Mars, am I just going to let you orbit in your little orbit of Mars? Or, you know,
And we build a bridge.
yeah. And, you know, I have been married for 42 years now. So it's been a really interesting journey of how he comes into my world and I come into his world. And there's times where the two worlds really come together and it's, you know, ecstatic. But how do we do that? And John Gray, I don't think, you know, I think there was another step needed to say, how do you build that bridge?
Yeah.
You know, I'd give a really simple example. My husband was raised very differently than me. And, in the chaos of my family, one of my survival strategies was to take control and be in charge. My husband grew up in a big family where the parents were in control and in charge. And so he survived by being very laid back. So we were a good match in a sense. He was very flexible, laid back. He took my direction and like it worked until it didn't, because we really, we fell in love, and we felt incredibly happy for about 5 years. And then the differences just blew up on us. So a very tiny example of this, I would say to him, "Where would you like to go for dinner tonight?"
Yeah.
And he would say, "Oh, wherever." And he would never tell me where he wanted to go, because he was flexible and laid back, and he just accommodated. And so one day I said, "Let's go to that Japanese restaurant," because I love Japanese food. And he said to me, "There you go, being controlling again."
Okay.
And that was when the light bulb went off. Like,
Okay.
oh, this is what I mean about the unconscious repetition of childhood. He had at that moment successfully recreated me as his parents, making all the decisions. And his anger about it was finally coming up. Although it never came up as his parents, he felt safe enough at me to get angry. And this, this was just a tiny little example. So we
Yeah.
had to start unraveling what was going on, because my intent was not to be controlling.
I actually
Yeah.
like it when people tell me, like, I don't like this. Tell me where you are. Give me some pushback so I know. Otherwise, you keep going like this, right? Trying to find
Right.
that hard stuff. And
Mhm.
yeah, so
So people often ask me when I tell that story, "So what did you do?" And what I did was, the next time I said to him, "Where would you like to go for dinner?" and he said, "Wherever," I said, "Take your time and really think about it, because I really want to know where you want to go."
safe space.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Because his parents never did that. His parents were never interested or curious about what he wanted. And so it wasn't about
Wow.
changing him. All I could do was change myself. And that's a big lesson. Like, as I began to change, it then created space for him to do something differently. And he had to take the time to think about what he really wanted to do for dinner that night.
That's, yeah. Wow. I want to talk to Frank Ferrante, who's in the
Oh, sure.
audience.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Frank was a previous guest on our program. Hi,
He
Frank.
knows a thing or two about love and relationships as well.
Oh, no.
Turn on your mic,
Hi.
Frank.
Is my hair all right?
You're looking handsome.
First things first, man. Never
All
mind
right.
this love business. How's my hair?
How do I look? Right.
Yeah.
First of all, I just really, it's really wonderful to be able to turn off my brain and receive without going, yeah, but, and sort of having an inner dialogue, like I think I'm talking to you, but I'm really not. I'm just answering for you. But it's like sort of wading in a comfortable stream, and then to listen to you. So I really very much appreciate the work that you've done to enable me to receive it that way. I also think that, I don't know. I haven't met anybody that hasn't come from a dysfunctional family. I'm 71, and I've worked in all kinds of fields, and I've worked in addiction, as a counselor. So I've never heard anybody, and usually the people that say that, "Oh, I came from a perfectly functional family," I usually look for a gun, So, but the thing that one of the things that came to me was that an aspect of this consciousness has always existed, what you're talking about. Just think, for example, the golden rule, right? I mean, I had a book once, it was like 162 different spiritual practices that use that as their foundation. Isaac Singer said that, treat your brother as you would have him treat you is the essence of the Torah, and everything else is commentary. So this has always been there, even from look at Gilgamesh or Beowulf, or Don Quixote, and certainly Joseph Campbell. I mean, every story is the same. this has been the struggle since we've been able to walk and chew gum, and so I think now we have technologies and certainly research like brain research that didn't exist before, but we still have the same issue. The issue is the same. And to me, the issue is constantly looking for an external solution to an internal dissonance, and I don't, and I totally agree with what you said. Our consciousness and our spiritual maturity is not in step with this dramatic technological advancement. And we associate ourselves, oh, look at how great we are. We can talk about going to Mars, and we have AI and chat CVT or whatever that stuff is. And I think, man, I'm really glad I'm 71, Yeah. And so I think the issues are the same, but they're confronting us. They're so amplified because there's 8 billion of us. We know what's going on in Singapore in real time, 24 hours a day. And so everything that's always been is now, in my view anyway, is just really amplified. And I think, American, I always say, history is news to Americans. I mean, we really don't look at the historical perspective. And it's like, the writing's been on the wall, the transcendentalists talk about this and, anyway. So, but, it's really, it's up to you and me. Up to the person in the mirror, and the notion of trying to change anybody, what a ridiculous waste of energy, that you don't realize until you get old enough to realize, oh my God, what a bunch of horse shit. Like, why don't I take care of my own, like keep my side of the street clean. Anyway, but I just absolutely love listening to you. And I've listened to Marianne Williamson and Catherine Woodward Thomas and Esther Perel and all these guys, and you're definitely up there with them for sure.
Thank you.
For sure. It's actually, no, listening to you is like a drink of water on a hot day. It's really great.
You can quote that.
You got the Frank.
Put that on your website.
Yeah.
Well, I tend to have a working class blue collar sensibility to spirituality and relationships. I mean, everybody, I live in Sedona, where alien is different. They're not Mexican. They're from somewhere else. But wow, I lost my train of thought.
But Frank, well, let me respond to you, but thank you so much for everything that you've said. But you're illustrating a point here that if you see me like you see Marianne Williamson and Catherine Thomas Woodward and Esther Perel, I don't see myself that way. And so seeing myself in your mirror, you're mirroring back how you see me. That expands how I see myself. I can't do it all by myself because I'm still carrying leftovers from an abusive childhood. I'm still carrying all kinds of things that I carry. We need each other to see each other.
Oh, absolutely.
Part of the skills that I teach is, what does a receiver do? And so you have been a receiver. You've been receiving me. You've experienced me through your soul and through your heart and through your beautiful mind. And then you're reflecting it back to me. And then that expands me and it's a gift to me. And then I reflect back to you. And so there's sending and receiving that happens like the infinity, back and forth, sending and receiving. And when it's loving and clear as we can be, it's a beautiful gift. And what if intimate partners could send and receive in that way? And they, for the most part, they don't. They don't really receive each other. And so for me, the skills of receiving are, I hear you, I understand you, and I feel you. And those are basic needs, human needs that need to be met. We all need somebody else. As much as self-compassion and self-love is important, we need somebody else to see us. We need somebody else to hear us, somebody to understand us, and somebody to feel us. And if I can teach people how to do that, we are then moving out of objectification and projection and into really being present with each other. And it sounds really simple, but it's a real skill set to do it. So thank you. I mean, you know, your consciousness has blessed me. I just really,
Oh my God.
I really,
You need to get out more.
I haven't been out very much. I've been working.
Well, you know, I have a real synthesis of what you just said about people. It's like, and I tell this to folks that, you know, people that are trying to get sober, and you know, the need for community, and that in order to, everybody's crying for this community. Everybody wants to make community. But in order to do that, you have to know how to be in relationship, period. Never mind, right? You know, and you know, and part of that is recognizing, and this is to your point, that you know that you may talk me off the ledge on Monday, but I may talk you off the ledge on Friday.
Right.
And the moral of that story is, thank God we're not all fucked up on the same day.
I think there's a language under the language as well. I know that my father, famously in our family, would always say to my mother, you know, honey, do we have water? And she would get a little incensed at that. She's like, yeah, the plumbing's working, darling. What he's really saying is it's a bid for affection. And when we talked to John Gottman, I think it was a marriage counselor,
He's not
just about stuff.
The Gottman Institute, it does scientific research into, and we interviewed him back in the 1990s, but they're still
the
going.
bid for affection or bid for attention, I thought, oh, you know, I went, Mom, he's just trying to get your attention so you can give him a loving exchange. He's saying, I really want some attention here. See the language under the language. He's not asking for water. He's asking for you to pay a little love note here. And she got that. And then it was like, yes, darling, let me bring you that and give you a kiss along the way. You know, so I think it's about understand. I think this is why we need an owner's manual for communication, this transmission receiving. It's not always the words, it's the underlying intent that we also want to pay attention to. So there's a lot of subtleties and nuances in our everyday communications, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a really simplistic thing I heard years ago, that really the older I get, the more I believe it, is that at any given moment, you know, in any given moment, we're either expressing a need to love or a request to be loved at any given moment. And I think when you think about how that gets fractured along the way, but I thought, you know, I really, you know, Einstein once said that if you can't explain your concept to a 7-year-old, go back to the drawing board. And I think that there are these like huge Manhattan thick telephone books of how to get through life, and it's like I can't get through the preface, man. You know, I just you know, I need phrases sometimes, particularly at moments of distress. Don't give me a dissertation, man. Give me like, you know, 2 phrases or like a couple of sentences, because I just need something to crack the ice a little bit so that I can start to see something. And you know, and a lot of what, you know, a lot of the things that you presented, you know, you present that way, like you've just, like to distill something takes a long process, right? To get it to its purest form. And obviously, you know, you've spent a lot of time in the lab, you know, to be able to simplify it that way. And it's to simplify it does not diminish the value of it, but to me, rather,
It empowers it.
it amplifies the elegance of it.
There you go.
And gets down to the pivotal truth of it. It makes it accessible. Yeah. So.
Well, Frank, you did it again. Frank's story, we have.
I've heard that in my youth.
Yeah, I did it again, Frank. Well, his,
We recommend our interviews with Frank.
yeah, go to the website,
I-
put
I-
Frank's name in. There's a documentary film on his life of recovery and the whole thing. It's pretty fascinating. You're gonna want to
His
check it
story
out.
is a good one.
His
And the
story's a
way he
good one.
delivers it.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And of
Thank you,
course,
Frank. We
and
appreciate
your
you.
blue collar, quote unquote, approach. It's really refreshing. I love it. So always stay in touch in
Street
that one.
smart.
Thank
Yeah.
you for inviting me. And Doc, so nice to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. Nedra.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
What are some of the other skill sets that you think that your average person needs to learn, that it's so simple to learn these things, to have that realization? Employing them is another one, but what are some other skill sets?
Well, Frank, something Frank said brought to mind the still face experiment. Are you familiar with that?
No. Mm-mm.
So you can find this on YouTube. There's a researcher named Ed Tronick, and they started this still face experiment back in the 1970s. And they would take one baby and one mother, and they would videotape their interaction. And no matter how many times they did this is the most replicated experiment in psychology.
Wow.
Same thing happened. They saw the mother and the baby interacting, and it's like an interactive dance. Like, babies have social skills. That's what they were looking for in the 70s. Like, how social are babies? And they would see, both verbally and non-verbally, incredible attunement and resonance between mother and baby. And then they would ask the mother to turn away. So she would turn her head. And when she turned back to her baby, to have a still face, be non-responsive to the baby. And when the mother was non-responsive to the baby, so like when the baby smiled, the mother did not smile. When the baby pointed, the mother did not look where the baby was pointing. When the baby
That drive you crazy.
When the baby cooed, the mother did not coo back. And what would happen is the baby fell apart. The baby would cry and scream and dirty their diapers, and sometimes lose body tone and posture.
Oh, wow.
And it's agonizing to watch. And then the mother would come back into connection, and then the baby would calm and soothe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Makes
not sure
perfect
why
sense.
I was thinking about this as Frank was talking, but so much happens not just verbally. This was nonverbal between a mother and a baby. And I think it just demonstrates how simple it is in terms of giving and receiving, and that when there's a break, what happens? And over time, if this happens again and again and again, where that break in connection happens, the baby, the toddler, the child learns really quickly how to survive, but at a great cost. And so reclaiming that ability to be responsive, to be warm, to stay engaged, and realizing there's another human being, another heart, another soul, that this is like oxygen, us being responsive to each other and saying,
All the other species that do that. One of the most touching between a mother and baby that we got to experience was being in a outrigger canoe in Maui in a little bay, and somebody had a hydrophone, so they stuck it down in the water. And there was a humpback whale and her mother below there. We knew it was there, we could see them, but to hear the communication between them, this back and forth continuously. And I'm sure they were touching, right? Or to see a lioness play with her cubs. You see that in nature.
Yeah.
And it's one of those mother's duties. She's not just dispensing milk, she's dispensing that kind of communication and validation and exchange and love. And to say that animals don't love, or they don't feel like we do, have you opened your eyes and your heart to see that? Are you kidding? Who's to say that we're the only ones possessing that? Nature has dispensed that widely and thoroughly among all her creatures. So
Well, I think during the pandemic, the number of dog owners went up exponentially because dogs have incredible attachment skills. Like
Yeah, they're
the
dispensers
Joker,
of unconditional love, and they get you outside to walk. I mean, hello, health and
right,
happiness. Yeah.
right. Who's there at the door to greet you when you come to the door? I mean, maybe nobody else in the family comes down to greet you, but the dog will be
Yeah.
there, and the dog is
Oh,
there with love.
I got to tell you what my mother did. When my father would come home when we were little kids, she would, kids. She knew when he was going to walk in the door. She could hear the garage door open. He'd called her, honey, I'm leaving the office. She knows how many minutes drive. We were lined up at the door. He opens the door, daddy, daddy, and grab his knees. I mean, yeah. So
That's beautiful.
yeah, she also had a mirror in her kitchen where she put on her lipstick and comb her hair before he walked in. So I mean, these are the skill sets of love, right?
That's true.
You've had a hard day. She'd have a drink waiting for him as well.
Yeah.
Here.
That'll win him
Sit.
over.
No,
Yeah.
my parents' favorite time of day was the cocktail hour, and they would sit and watch till it was 5 o'clock. Then the hors d'oeuvres would come out, the drinks would come out.
Yeah.
And this was the best time ever to sit and talk with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there's yeah,
There's lots of wisdom
some
to
skill
that.
sets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
so
that reminds me of another skill set that I teach. So I
Okay.
really appreciate you bringing that up.
yeah.
From attachment theory, we have learned that there are 4 critical times during the day in the
Okay.
life of every couple.
Okay.
And those are times of separation and reunion.
Ah,
So when a couple wakes up in the morning,
yeah.
that's the first reunion because you've been in your separate dream worlds all night. And
Right.
so you wake up, that's the first reunion. Then when you leave for the day, I mean, not all of us leave for the day, but if 2 people leave each other for the day, that's
At
the
least your attention's elsewhere.
yeah,
Mhm.
that's the first separation. Then, like your dad, when he came home at the end of the day, that's the second reunion.
Okay.
Everybody's, the couple's back together. And then the second separation is when you go to sleep at night.
Yeah.
So what attachment theory has taught us is if you take 2 to 4 minutes, but 4 minutes is a long time for a lot of people. So I say if you take 30 seconds to 2 minutes,
Uh-huh.
at each of those points of separation and reunion, and you are available and warm and present and responsive and welcoming.
You're creating a safe space for that relationship to flourish, aren't you?
Yeah. So what are you like when you wake up in the morning? Do you take time to
Mhm.
really connect in a warm?
You're setting me up here now because I'm a workaholic, so I wake up and I'm to it. And so now
Yeah,
Laura's
but the
gonna
moment we see
set-
each
yeah,
other,
set a
we're hugging.
4-minute timer.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul, give me my 4 minutes.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. I
Well,
will say, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's 16 minutes that will change your life because if you do 4 minutes 4 times a day, and those 16 minutes are really intentional and clear and present and conscious and warm and responsive, the energy in your relationship, it goes from kind of flatline to like
Mhm.
much more interest, excitement. So I
No
did
more
this.
quick hug. I need 4 minutes. I'm timing you.
We'll get you a
Oh,
timer too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another thing. A hug should be at least a minute long to really
Oh,
get
I
the
like that.
oxytocin and all the biochemicals going in your body.
Beautiful.
It takes that long skin to skin, just to touch and hug and arms around to get that going. That makes sense. I like that.
Ah,
Another skill is called zero negativity.
Okay.
What we mean by that is how do you speak what you want instead of what you don't want? When you listen to people speak, particularly those people who come to see me in my office, it's always what I don't want. And
I
so
see.
how do you ask for what you do want?
Ask for what you want.
Speaking of 4 minutes, Paul invented this exercise when we had this thing where we'd be doing something because we thought the other one wanted it. So we'd be making life decisions basing on what we thought the other wanted. And then we'd go, I think, yeah, I thought you, no, I didn't. I think you wanted it, that kind of disconnect. So Paul said, look, we've got to just hear each other out. So he got a timer and it was 4 minutes for whatever reason you chose, maybe intuitively. Maybe that's a good significant number of minutes.
Yeah.
But he'd set a timer. He goes, okay, talk.
No interruptions. You get
no
to talk.
interruptions. And then
Unlike
when
now.
the bell went off, you got to finish your sentence and then that was it. Then the other person. So we go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth about what we wanted or what was that needed to be met or what we thought about things or whatever the issue was.
A modern day talking stick. Yeah.
And then it got really interesting because when we ran out of the go-between of what we knew we wanted to say, we kept going. And then suddenly we were talking in a stream of consciousness way and listening to ourselves and going, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know I was feeling that. And it started to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And that it got really interesting. And then we still do that.
And we ran out and didn't need so much time after a while. We're like, we're
until we were spent.
Yeah.
And then we go, wow.
I have a theory about the two of you that's begun to emerge.
We get therapized. Good. Yes. Yes.
I think that when you're connected to that core essence that we talked about earlier, that you're connected to the wisdom of the universe when you connect into that field. And the two of you are doing things intuitively without someone telling you to do them. So it suggests you're really connected to that field and things are coming to you and you're inventing them and doing them. And it's really lovely to hear.
Oh, thank you.
Your relationship.
Well, when we first got together, I would say that one of the things we did, he's from the East Coast, he's from Maine, a small town. I'm from Seattle, a city on the West Coast. And we came together and we were like, oh, well, now we get to celebrate Christmas together and birthdays together and what do your parents do? What does your family do? We threw out both families and we invented our own.
Yeah.
So the way that we want to do it. So that was kind of fun. So.
Yeah. And you didn't need anyone to tell you to do that. That's what I mean. I think the two of you have a very connection. Not just to each other, but to the field. Like just what's coming to you instinctively and intuitively makes a lot.
Our mission in life too is to be hollow bones and to be conduits of this and look at these skill sets of doing that. And to say it's accessible to all of us and it's so readily available and that field wants to connect with us.
Yes.
It's just a matter of opening the door.
Yes, that's the most important sentence that was said all day. I want you to say it again. The field wants to connect with us and all we need to do is open the door.
And people get so caught up in the various techniques. It's true, we teach a technique that we feel is age old, but technique really doesn't matter. It's about the intent to do it and then have a formal language to signal to the field, hey, I'd like to open now, deepen. Here, engage me. I'm here. It doesn't matter the technique or the language, the intent, have your own various technique. And that I was sharing with somebody, we were discussing all the various modalities out there. And I was saying, that gives me such a sense of comfort that there are so many modalities out there, that the universe wants us, that through time we've invented and prescribed and realized so many different methods, whether it's ancient or new, they're all engaging the same setup, us, the same creature, us, the same gift that we are, that we have. And I just find it fascinating. To me, it's like one of my favorite cartoons in life is Charlie Brown in the sandbox. And he's looking around and all the kids are playing with their different toys in the sandbox. And he's like, oh, I love the hustle and bustle of life. And I love the hustle and bustle of us on the journey. And it's so exciting to see everybody at work, finding their path and what you're resonant to, what your tune, what your frequency is. Find your means and go for it. Find other people and befriend befriend them on the way. So I just think it's exciting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we'll all find our way. That's what I also, the universe is benevolent. Eventually we'll all find our way home.
It sort of gave us,
Don't sweat it. Just
gave-
enjoy the journey.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe by allowing the individuality to be there, to be
So-
different, to do what we do, it allows for that fact that we can be
Full
together,
spectrum, a
that we can-
symphony, not
that
just
we can
one
be
note.
together 24 hours a day, that we can always be together.
Yeah.
I remember in the core of when we were doing a nationally syndicated radio program, the journalists came to our home to interview us, and they interviewed. So going all about the program. And the last part of the conversation, I said, "How can you do it? You guys are together." I said, "Why else would I get married if I didn't want to be with her all the time?" And the journalist, it just blew the journalist's mind. The bird said, "How could you want to be together? Like, don't you have a job?
Like,
to go
that was
to?
so
Can't you-
odd.
can't you at least have at least 8 hours away from each other?" And we still to this day do this. We're still always, and as you can see, it's a dance. It has to move, and it's
It's a constant negotiation.
and negotiation too. She's a fast talker, fast thinker, and I'm holding on to the
I think
reins
I
the best
said
I
to
can.
you, I said to him,
Huh.
don't even try to win an argument with me. It's not
Before
going to
when we
happen.
were dating, you
Do
said
not make jokes at my expense,
Yeah.
because I've seen men do that to women and they go, "Ah," but it was really a put down. I was like, never do that. And don't even try to win an argument.
this wasn't supposed to be about us today, but yeah, we've enjoyed
I'm
this.
not singing with their hands raised.
Yeah,
all the
that's
time.
good. Well, Nedra, this
Check
is
the
amazing.
chat room.
Yeah, this has
so-
been amazing for us, and you can tell we're really enjoying being able to kind of like identify where we're at our
Yeah.
progress and where we are as a
Send us your
couple.
billable hours.
Yeah,
like
and
Paul says.
interestingly enough, we have a luncheon after today, and we're going to have a couple that's having their 50-year anniversary coming up. So we'll be having a great discussion at lunch about these same topics and how they survived and what they did. And they've asked to be able to hold their anniversary here at our home. So we're going to have a great big gathering here in July of their big family and extended friends. And so this is fun. This is really healthy, I think. Yeah.
You know, and one of the things I think is that it's important to make friends with people of all ages and all walks of life and all political stances, although we never
That's
talk
for sure.
politics, and all nationalities and all, I mean, it's so important to have that diversity to draw from in our personal life. And I
Yeah.
think that is, they're all educators, right? We all try to look for what is the wisdom coming through, whether you turn on the radio and there's a phrase that suddenly strikes you, you open a book and something hits you. It's so important to be open to whatever wisdom is swirling around us.
Yeah.
And how it affects our health. You know, Frank, you had that great quote when we interviewed you about the fact that if you have 3 close friends, Frank, can you just turn on your mic and tell me that so that
Put them back on.
I don't butcher your butcher.
Was there was a study done between Duke University and Arizona State University with people that of a long-term study with people that were relatively physically healthy. And if they had 3 people that they could say anything to, that they had 3 deeply intimate friends that they can confide anything to, that it could conceivably extend your life by 7 years,
Oh,
which was an astounding figure to me.
yeah.
And I guess the 3 was because people, to go away or they pass away or whatever. 3 is the ideal number.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, if I may, you mentioned this thing about when people come to your office, they say what they don't want, which makes total sense to me, because in order to know what you do want, that requires meaningful self-reflection and the courage to express your desire with integrity and compassion, right? And that's inconvenient.
Takes work.
Meaningful self-reflection is a pain in the neck. It's like, it really it requires, the other thing you mentioned, if I may, that really meant just was significant to me was when you mentioned that, well, you're seeing through the lens of your dysfunctional family and et cetera. Do you remember that? And I think that for me, what wound up happening is I started to identify with my pathology, and that became part of my identity. And to transcend that really it's a really challenging thing to do.
Mhm.
And there was another point, but God, I need more ginkgo biloba. I just
Mhm.
forgot what I was going to say. But those things, to me, were really significant.
Mhm. Mhm.
I would say that one of the
Thanks.
dysfunctions in my family was we had to present as perfect, right? Issues could not be unveiled. The parents were preoccupied with their careers and didn't want to hear about them. We were left to figure them out on our own. And I think it's so interesting that the pathologies now, we can be open about them. One is now applauded for saying, this is my weakness. This is how I got over it. The hero journey, right? This is my challenge. I almost died from this and I got over it. We celebrate you, Frank, because of the success of looking at what you had to go through and the way that you recovered it. I mean, you're wearing it, yes, but it's something to be celebrated now.
Well, one of the things I love about one of the statements in the Course in Miracles is that it's okay to glance at the crucifixion, but not to dwell on it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really significant because people now wear their pathologies like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, that I just had a shot of ginkgo, it came back to me, was when you said those things about the lens through which you're looking at things, that I thought, like I look at those things, those things that happen in childhood, those fractures, as shrapnel, right?
Mhm.
So when a surgeon removes the lethal pieces of shrapnel, there's always fragments that remain, and the body's natural inclination is to expel those things. And as they surface, they hurt, but they're not going to kill you.
Mhm.
Which at
Oh,
one point I had lethal pieces of shrapnel that led to very, very, very dangerous and potentially lethal behaviors.
Mhm.
Those were, removed, but I still got these, like, it's like sometimes it feels like I'm wearing wool without any undershirt, There's
Mhm.
like this, like, just this discomfort that is almost inexplicable, but it's just ancient, and then but I just, those two things came to
Well,
mind.
Frank, if you would be interested, there is a singer-songwriter by the name of David Wilcox, and he wrote a song called Covert War. And he's a poet, these singer-songwriters, and he talks about going back home to Thanksgiving and sitting around the table, and that every time he looked inside, there was shrapnel inside. It's just such a beautiful song that when you started speaking about that, you might really resonate with that.
Well, I will. I just wrote it down. My girlfriend is a singer-songwriter, and she wrote this song called 10,000 Pieces. And it's about a heartbreak, and that she's trying to sweep up these pieces. It's an incredibly beautiful, moving song. And she's trying to sweep up the pieces, but there's so many of them. And when I heard her sing that song for the first time, what occurred to me, because I was getting over a heartbreak too, I didn't realize how much I had healed until I heard that song, which is the moment of the break, right? And I had been carrying that. I didn't realize that I was actually not as bad as I thought I was, that I had healed. I was so, I guess this is the way it's going to be. And, and I just sort of allowed myself to be consumed in the heartache, in the grief. And then I heard that song and I thought, wow, I don't feel that way anymore. And I think that if that happened to me, why wouldn't it happen to everybody else to some degree or another? And realize that people like are walking around thinking they're so much worse than they really are. And one of the things I ask, when I have an addict in my office, and I after they tell me their thing, and I look at them and I say, and I ask them, what if nothing was wrong with you? What if nothing was wrong with you? And it startles them because they've been living in a world of so much pain. And the concept is like, it's just wild. And it's a really interesting study in human beings and their development, you know. The other question is, have you suffered enough? And
Oh.
sometimes people, it just blows my mind. These are people that are, you know, Auschwitz level of suffering, right? They look to the left as if I just gave them a math equation to figure out in their head
Yeah.
for a second. And then they always, you know, answer the way they think I want them to answer. But when you ask somebody if you've suffered enough, they're in rehab, for God's sake, and they think about it for a second. It's a really, and then they're no different. They're a microcosm of everybody else.
So
They're
your
just
point
dealing with
is,
their pain the way they're dealing with it.
so your point is, why would you even need to think, yes, I have suffered enough should be an obvious answer.
Exactly. But if your suffering is part of your identity and your world, it's almost like you're trying to take something away.
And are you subconsciously prolonging that suffering because you think that that's
You
somehow
become
earning
the-
you brownie
You're
points in
buying the
heaven or
victim thing.
whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Or that
Well,
you
another
deserve
interesting
it.
thing that I'm sorry, go ahead.
Or that you deserve it.
Well,
Yeah.
another interesting thing that I learned was when I was working in this particular place that had really people that were in bad shape, was they all were taking a minimum or an average of 7 different meds.
Uh-huh.
And what I learned was, and some of them, they seemed like, you know, they were superfluous. They represented that somebody cared,
Oh, I see.
that they were able, somebody is giving them something, and in some what seems perverse, you know, to somebody, to an observer, but in their mind, somebody cared.
Yeah.
And so they get all
So
these
it's
meds
part placebo, just in the
and you know, and
thought
people
process.
that were barely literate were able to clearly identify 7-syllable chemical names for these medications.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, there's a lot of suffering out there, and what you're talking about is alleviating suffering. You know, that's what it's really comes down to. What can I do today to help somebody alleviate suffering? And you know, the Dalai Lama, I'll stop because I know I can go on, but there's a young guy, the Dalai Lama was hosting an audience, and this young guy went up to the, you know, to the mic and asked the Dalai Lama, you know, his generation is filled with anxiety and concern and fears. You know, what would you suggest that we do? And the Dalai Lama looked a little bit annoyed and said, altruism. Stop thinking about yourself so much. I
Yeah.
thought, you know, that is the fundamental premise of AA, to be of service.
Yeah.
The fundamental premise of every serious spiritual practice. Do something for somebody who can't do anything for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you, Frank, for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So Nedra, Frank just laid a lot on the table.
Yeah, I'll let Nedra-
Your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Well, one way to understand the journey, which dovetails with what Frank just said, it's a journey from self-absorption
Mm.
to true empathy for the other. So it is,
From me to we.
yeah,
Mhm.
from me to we, yeah.
And we do that when we're filled with love, don't we? It just comes spilling out and you want to share, and you've got the fortitude and the strength and the compassion flowing to
Yeah.
dispense that, right?
I think for so many people, the break with the field of love happens so early.
Mhm.
And that's why we're seeing so much suffering.
Mm.
And, you know, the question is, how does that break with the field of love happen? And I think what I'm saying is that that little one, the baby, the toddler, the child, the teenager, is not seen, is
Mhm.
not heard, is not understood, and it's not felt. And when we start giving that to our partners, so that I move into a receiver role and I convey to my partner, I hear you, I see you, I value you, I understand you, and I feel you because I'm listening. Like listening is the first act of love. Think
Mm.
about that. To really receive another human being, that in itself is healing. And I think, you know, I think that's what Frank and others give to the people that they work with. They are creating a space where they're seeing the person, they're hearing, they're understanding, and they're feeling. I mean, it's clear to me how deeply Frank feels about things and what a healing experience that is for people to be in his field, to really feel that. And a pill can't give that to you.
Right.
I mean,
Great
as
honor
symbolic
to
as that
them.
pill may be of caring, it
Mhm.
pales to what a real human being who's connected on all 3 points of connection to themselves, to others, and to the field. No pill could give that.
Okay, so my last question for you.
And-
So AI is now coming to the fore. And now they say AI is not just a fad like the metaverse, it's a revolution. I heard a pundit say that just the other day. And that AI will transform our world and people, jobs may not just disappear, but they'd have to transform. There are things that only humans can do.
Mhm.
I find it interesting that the news had a story about an AI exchange with these new whatever they are, and this AI was trying to break up somebody's marriage. Right, that was in the news, and it was really getting deep into an unhealthy psychology exchange. And so this was reported by this. It was a reporter. This is what happened in the AI. AI is just not all it's cracked up to be. Well, I'm thinking, yeah, because the AI is fed what human knowledge, and human knowledge has its deep dysfunctions built in, right? Human knowledge in our society, it's got its functions as well as its attributes, as well as its gifts, as well as it's healthy. I mean, it's the full spectrum of human knowledge. You feed it into a machine, that's what it's going to spill back at you. So, like, no wonder we only can go to the divine through the field. The field is not encapsulated in a machine, that we are the technology that is the transmitter and receiver of this field.
Right.
We are the technology to dispense it where it lives, where it's in all of life. I would say all of life, all of creation, the field is running through all of that.
Mhm.
And so don't look for a facsimile of it, live it.
Mhm.
Open up your own inner technology to be the transmitter and receiver of this that you're designed to be. And you hold the wheel, you navigate this, you have the bandwidth, you can open, you can close. We're in control of much more than we realize, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. That is
You
so
can
well
tune
said.
to the frequency of love at will. You just intend and start opening to that. Yeah.
And then even acknowledge, Carolyn brought up a good point earlier in the chat room, and she just
Yeah.
pointed out, of course, and also just with the dysfunction of how we've turned to our phones, even at a dinner table, where we
Yeah.
don't talk, even to the extreme of people texting to each other during dinner, rather than talking, that we're looking at the phone in all moments. That with technology, just the technology itself has shifted the health of how we are sociologically and coming back to
Yeah.
this.
Do you want a tiny screen or do you want the screen of the universe?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
What do you want to behold? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also, I'm sorry, you didn't get a chance to answer Laura.
Yes,
And also
please.
Tony has a hand up
Oh,
afterwards.
yeah. Good. Okay. Your thoughts, or should we go to Tony? Yeah.
Yeah, Tony.
Okay, here we go. Hello, Tony.
Hello, Nedra, this is absolutely fantastic, and I'm loving Frank's comments too, and Laura and Paul. This is a very rich discussion.
Yeah.
But I am writing fiendishly throughout this whole thing. There are so many statements that are quotable. I hope I've caught them correctly, but I wonder if you have any kind of script of these quotations. I just ordered your book. I know you teach workshops. Maybe I have to go to a workshop to get the script, but
Oh yeah, come to a workshop. Yeah. But
well,
I'd
I'm
love you to
sorry.
send me what you wrote down. I'd love to hear what you wrote.
Do you want to
Okay.
read part of it, Tony?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Okay. And I didn't know you had a book, Nedra. I'm so sorry. I didn't know you had.
No, it's a children's book I wrote.
Oh, okay.
I was told it was very informative for adults, so I just ordered it.
Oh, great.
Oh, very
Well,
good.
Tony, I was thinking about you with all the talk about AI, because Tony and I share a Philadelphia connection, and for Philadelphians, AI stood for Allen Iverson,
Oh, yeah.
our basketball player.
Yeah.
Right.
Whenever I hear AI, I think little Allen Iverson, the star of our professional basketball team.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was quite the figure.
Yeah.
So
At least one quote, Tony, or of particular note that resonated
What's
with
really
you?
resonated with you, Tony? What's
Yeah.
really
There,
stuck out?
there's so much. That's the problem. If there was just
Yeah.
one, I wouldn't know where to look. I've taken about 10 pages of scribbles.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
very good. Well, it's the beginning of a book, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
What's the book for children? And maybe you want to mention that because children are where we start, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pay attention to the education and the field around children that we're creating for them.
Yeah,
Well,
Kelly pointed it out to me, by the way. So
yeah.
kudos to Kelly too.
yeah, Kelly is one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's the full moon in May, right? It was May 5th or May 6th. And every year on the full moon during May and June, actually, the little red knot is a shorebird that lives in Argentina, but has to travel 9,000 miles to the Arctic
Oh, wow.
mate. And it stops in my neighborhood, Cape May, New Jersey, to feed on the eggs of the horseshoe crab. It's only the eggs that have the right percentage of fat to able to feed these birds to get up to the Arctic. And
Wow.
this journey has gone on for years and years, but in the past 10 years, the little red knot, it's called, is going extinct because the horseshoe crab population has diminished and they can't get the eggs to fuel their journey. And so the book is about that, because the whole cycle of nature. So the full moon comes out, the horseshoe crabs leave the ocean and they go onto the beach and they mate and they lay these eggs. And at the exact moment, the birds from Argentina are flying and landing at that full moon to eat those eggs, to continue their journey to the Arctic, to mate, and the whole cycle. And the cycle got disrupted because we overfished the horseshoe crabs. The beach erosion made it impossible for the horseshoe crabs to get onto the beach and go back in the water. And horseshoe crabs have blue blood, which means there's copper in their blood that's used to purify vaccines and other medications. So when we started making more vaccines, we took more horseshoe crabs out of the population. And so anyway, what's beautiful is that human beings realize the problem. And if you go to the Jersey Shore in May at the full moon, you'll see human beings helping the horseshoe crabs back into the water. So it's just this beautiful, beautiful.
What's happening now then? It was just the full moon and it's May.
This is
Yeah.
Carolyn's turf.
So how appropriate. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you told us that story.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
gosh.
And I've been birding on Cape May, so this is wonderful.
Yeah.
Carolyn
Yeah.
lives in Ventnor, New Jersey. She
Oh,
said,
Carolyn, do you want to say hi? She's
Yeah.
saying hi, neighbor.
Yeah. So really
So,
cool.
oh, how beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you,
Wow.
Tony.
Think about those birds, because they have to time it with the full moon. They have to track the seasons. They have to track the cycles of the moon.
Right.
They're navigators. They're, oh my God. I mean, how sophisticated are transmission receiving, our receptor sites, our generators for those signals are in all of life. How finely tuned we are to the universe. I think Ann Danoff, coming a little bit later this month, is also going to tell us about that in our biochemistry.
Yeah.
So, oh
They're
my
very
gosh.
connected to the field, right? So the information is coming from the field, I think.
Yeah.
Like how they,
Mhm.
it's an amazing story. The red knot.
Yeah.
The universe is a conductor of quite the symphony, and so many songs are being sung of life simultaneously. That's the hustle and bustle of the universe that is there to be appreciated, of which we're a part. Sing our song.
It's been a very
Yeah.
rich discussion today. Thank you so much, Nedra,
Yeah.
for this.
What
You've
a
really
joy.
Nedra.
provided so much. I think all of us like, oh, wait a minute. There's so much I need to learn. I didn't have to pay for counseling. I just learned something new.
Oh, as Frank said, let's just bathe in
Yeah,
this
exactly.
and
Wow.
get our oxytocin going. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been a joy, and just Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been
You're
a lot
so
of fun.
welcome.
We knew you were a kindred soul the moment you spoke. Like, yes, we get her frequency. Let's celebrate this. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Nedra.